I'm happy that you joined us, that you came back and you go on with our discussion and our conference today in the studio. I'm the only one in Kiev, and in touch with us, we're having two speakers. One of the speakers is in Dubai, in the Emirates, and one of the speakers is in Kiev, but also online. So I'm introducing the participants of our discussion, which has the name, Does Procurement... I do apologize for that. So does procurement mean corrupt? So the participant of our discussion is Dr. Muddassir Ahmed, United Arab Emirates. Muddassir is the friend and the partner and the participant of our previous conference of ours, and we are so grateful for him for that, because last time he came to Kiev and conducted his workshop this year, Muddassir is taking part in this discussion. Muddassir is one of the leaders and bloggers in supply chain. He's created the company SCMDOJO, and now he's working as the planning manager in Bridgestone in the Emirates. Muddassir used to be the head of the procurement and supply chains at the productions and manufacturers, electrical, technical, machine building, and hydraulics, and different branches. Zoya Chechulina is from Ukraine. She had more than 20 years of experience in the company of Mondelez International at different positions, but everything was devoted to procurement. Recently, she dealt with the compliance of procurement and business risks. And now Zoya is working in the sphere of teaching, training, and consulting in the sphere of risk management and compliance in the procurement. So, we are beginning. Our first question is the following. Why, when we speak about the procurement and corruption in the procurement, we always mean the procurers, the buyers? Why don't we say that how other functions can be corrupt, how other people can be corrupt, not only buyers in this corruption process? And why, in fact, first of all, first and foremost, the buyers?
Okay.
Who is ready to answer?
Zoya, after
I
you.
can believe. I can begin.
Muddassir, Maryna.
Thank you, Muddassir, Maryna, esteemed participants. Hello, everyone. We have a very active topic after lunch. I think it will be fun. So answering your question, Maryna, I have the obvious answer, which is on the surface and which is really connected with the understanding of the function of procurement in the organization, and the deeper answer, which could lead us to the root cause of corruption. So, the obvious answer, if you ask any person in the organization what corruption is associated with, well, of course, the first thing will be the mentioning of the function of procurement and buyers. Why? On the one hand, no one can contradict that in the function of procurement, the function which has representative function for the external world and communicates with the suppliers, the risk of corruption is rather high. When we conduct the assessment of risks in the organization, it exists. But here we include two moments. First of all, the function which is close to the external world is not only the procurement, by the way, it could be marketing and sales and the function of the cooperation with the state authorities. All of them are communicating with the external world. And the second thing we need to think about is, in fact, when we speak about corruption, we speak not about the function, we speak about the human, ethical, and moral principles and corporate culture and values which are within this company, in this organization, which exist there. That is why, of course, naturally, there are famous facts when both buyers are involved into the corrupt schemes and the internal customers are lobbying certain suppliers, or even we could see the cases when they create so-called pocket suppliers using their administrative resource. But I would say that here I should come back to the issue of not only the representative of the function, then the ethical and moral norms and principles and culture in their organization. Muddassir, what do you think?
No, for sure. I think you have explained very well. So first and foremost, thank you for having me. I'm really missing not to be in Ukraine. I really enjoyed my last, when I was there last time. It was a fabulous event, one of the best events I've actually attended. The full crew was there, and this is only unfortunate that we cannot be together. But again, credit to Maryna and Victoria for keeping the momentum and making sure the passion is alive. And through the technology, of course, we are all connected. So congratulations and well done for continue to do so. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the good introduction. So coming to the topic actually. And I think the sentiment that the focus of corruption is generally biased is a pretty wrong sentiment. I think this is a very wrong impression, if you ask me. Given I am in supply chain about 15, 16 years in procurement, there's about 3 or 4 times I've come across, and let's call it some sort of experiences where there was some element of corruption, and actually none of them was driven by the procurement professionals themselves. In one of the examples where the leadership itself was actually forcing the procurement buyers and to basically get involved and not to use the, let's call it our fair and ethical way of sourcing to the right suppliers, because the supplier was a friend of a friend, and one of the CEOs wants to give them a favor, and they were almost directed in along those lines, right? So if the buyer wants to keep the job, he's got no choice but to follow the direction of the senior leader. The second instance I was involved, where we were basically exporting something to Saudi Arabia, which have a very strict requirement of SASO, for example. And the customer was almost forcing us, because it was one of the highest running product. It was a non-compliant product. And we, as an ethical company I used to work for, said, sorry, we cannot do business along those lines. But then the customer itself come back with the, let's call it a not so compliant solution. It was fair to say a corrupt solution that you can go and hire third party who can bribe people on the customs and then get the product through. So because it was almost forced by customer to do so, not the right solution, but I'm just giving example, again, not driven by the supply chain community. The third one, which I think is a bigger element, which is a socio-political culture of certain countries. So as you know, the best cost countries, when we talk about best cost countries, is your East Asia, Far East, or some Soviet countries as well. Unfortunately, because of the governments they are ruled by, there is a culture of corruption there. So if you want to be part of the business, if you want to do business, you are unfortunately forced to comply with those sort of activities. And again, I have noticed, I used to work for a company who was a high ethical standards. They could not able to grow in one of the countries because the practices of doing business was not compliant. So the answer of the point Maryna put forward, in my experience, it's not, none of them are actually driven by the procurement or supply chain community. There was a factors in play, which is either driven by leadership, socio-political element of the country you want to do business, or basically forced by a customer to do so.
Thank you, Zoya. Thank you, Muddassir. Why did I ask you that? Well, because in Ukraine and in other post-Soviet countries, rather often the equivalent of corruption is the buyer. And this is a very unpleasant, well, I would say, addition to the profession, this tail which is behind us and doesn't let buyers and procurement to show our wings, to show our professionalism, because we have this beforehand preliminary opinion about their work that definitely whatever you do, you are corrupt. So you were really right to mention that the question of ethical behavior, of corruption and ethical behavior is connected with the culture. And here, first of all, we need to speak about the culture of the company, as far as I understand. This will be my question. What's the role of culture of the company and the top management in the issues of ethics and zero tolerance towards behavior? And my second question will be connected whether there is any difference in the culture in different countries, in different states, of the attitude towards corruption. Muddassir and you, Zoya, have been working with different markets at different markets. What can you say about those two questions, which are rather substantial and seriously can impact or cannot impact? What do you think? Thank you, Maryna, for your questions. I would allow myself to mention that as for your first remark, that we have this whole tale of corruption. There is such a perception of the function of procurement when you need to make a deal with the supplier. I would like to say that I'd like to name them an example. I really believe that if, again, the organization is the broker, the policy, all of the functions will, but it can clearly show that with, as we know, rather high level of corruption, we can do something which is proper. As we say, do what is proper. So for me, this example is very personal because to me, it's Vyacheslav Gryhovetsky and the creation of Kiev Mohyla Academy, the university where we know in lots of universities there are certain rumors, approved or disapproved scandals, court trials about corruption. And while creating Kiev Mohyla Academy lots of years ago, the principle of zero tolerance to corruption was implemented thanks to such a will, political will, I would say, strong political will of the person who organized all of that and the people whom he chose for his team. And I may say that not just because I read it, but because I was starting there and my child is starting there now. I can see that it's really true. I wanted to name this example to emphasize the importance of the from top to bottom approach. If the leader of the organization himself believes what needs to be done properly, he understands, even from the business perspective, which advantages he gets and which risks he mitigates for the company doing something properly, especially in the long-term perspective. You may get a very short-term doubtful advantages in the short term when you avoid certain decisions, proper approaches, but in the long-term perspective, it can lead to rather serious consequences. And we may see that even now we have the list of top 10 FCPA fines or anything we take. Unfortunately, there are lots of examples and cases, but in my opinion, it's so important to understand for the owner of the business to understand the importance to do something properly about advantages, about the investment attractiveness, about the reputational component of the business, which is now from the compliance of the rules and ethical norms, and then even in the high corrupt country, it's still possible to conduct business properly. Yes, Zoya, and maybe not only the understanding, though it could be basics, but also demonstration of such behavior. Yes, beyond the talk, we need to do what we say. Thank you. Muddassir, what do you say?
No, so just to repeat the question, the first one is about the culture of the company. Second, the differentiation, different state. Or so let me take the first part. The like anything in any company is driven by the culture and the leadership behavior. Ethics is definitely a top priority. It is a responsibility of the leaders to develop the ethical culture. So let me say it in a different way. So for example, if you want to drive a culture of continuous improvement or cost reduction or cost optimization, then you would expect that most players, regardless at what level of organization you are, you have to part to play in cost reduction, continuous improvement, and things like that. But when it comes to ethical behavior and doing business correctly, it is started from top down. It is a very much top down driven initiative. So the leaders needs to demonstrate that. The leaders of the company needs to state that in their vision. Leaders in the company needs to state that in the cultural statement, right? That we want to do business in an ethical way with a lot of integrity, and we want to do business right. Okay. But at the same time, leaders do understand I work for a company have a very high ethical and standards. It comes with a lot of challenges because in the, let's call it, in the growing market or emerging market, it's not easy to do business, which we talked about, linked with the culture and socio-political elements of that specific country. So you know that if you're taking that choice, the road you're taking as a leader is not the easy road. It is a very, very difficult road to go through. But once you decided to do that and you do business correctly, it adds a huge amount of value to your brand. It adds a huge amount of value to the engagement of your employees, because you almost take a pride that, you know, we work for a highly ethical company. We have a lot of integrity in the way we do business, right? So it has a both internal satisfaction and a huge amount of credibility with the with the external customers. But it is actually very, very important, most importantly for a public companies. I mean, it's important for any company, but it's very, very important for any publicly traded company. Let me give you an example of what is the impact of which I recently follow. So I invest in a company called Boohoo. It's an e-commerce startup, right? So I have some shares, etc. And they were doing pretty well. They have a fantastic results, and thanks to COVID, I mean, their share price has gone double. But a couple of months ago, there was news that they were sourcing locally in a very, let's call it, in a conditions where they are not paying it fairly, and there was a, you know, some news of unethical practice, and the share price has gone boom down in literally half. So the value has gone down almost half, and it was just on the back of the news. But what didn't help them, that the leadership took a bit longer than a week to come clean. So if they would have accepted it and come back with the countermeasure that we are reviewing our supply chain, and one of our second tier suppliers has, you know, these kind of conditions to work with, they did not take a responsibility for about a week, which has actually damaged their share price even longer. So an issue which is comparatively small, you know, the issue they found in not even the first tier suppliers, they found the issue in the second tier supplier, right? But they do not have the enough mechanism to manage that damage, and it has really gone from a $4 billion company to $2 billion company. So the point I'm making is this: if the leadership would have taken the responsibility, created the culture, then this issue would have never occurred. First of all, they should know what's happening with their supply chain. They should know there is no, you know, people are not paid, underpaid, and, you know, there's no workers who are illegal to work with, things like that. So they should know all this, and they should avoid it going forward. So there's a clear example where the leadership take responsibility and make it part of the culture, which affects their brand value Once it affects the brand value, then it affects the business and the share price value going forward. So that's the my view of the first part. But I think that's the second part you have asked for is rather more tricky, right? And as we said, the if you go for countries like Germany or Western countries, the concept of the corruption, it's not there, because I worked in UK for that that many years. But if I don't want to name certain countries, but you can see the chart where it's known for the corruption, right? So this is where doing business gets very challenging. If you want to do things right, in fact, it gets very challenging. I mean, and it's all driven by, I think, the public office. So if you just Google corruption in procurement, and you will be surprised to see the first 10 results, the first page 10 results is all about how to stop corruption in public office, right? So the news, literally the Google search will not talk you about the private sector or the small and medium sized companies. They don't talk about that. So most of the problems is written around the stopping corruption in the public offices, right? I'm not sure you have a question or not, but there's a way which we can stop those activities of corruption in the public office as well. So if you've got nothing else, then I can add that at the end.
Yes, the difference between the public or procurement, as you properly mentioned, and the commercial ones really exists. But I think that they have something in common. There shouldn't be corruption, and behavior should be ethical anywhere. In this case, there shouldn't be any difference between them. And I like that the topic of leadership is mentioned since the first speech. We are speaking a lot about the leadership in procurement, in the changes of behavior, which is demonstrated by the communication, close communication with the business and internal customers and the stakeholders. So going on with the topic of leadership, ethical behavior without the demonstration of such a proper, correct approach, ethical approach, without the demonstration of at all of the stages of work, including procurement, is just impossible. And I totally agree with you in that. So here I'd like to ask, when I communicate with the representatives of the SMEs, small and medium businesses, where processes of monitoring and minimization of governance of the unethical behavior does not exist. They don't have the code of conduct or the code of ethical conduct and any other element which include the ethics in the procurement. What would you recommend them to do to minimize those risks, to mitigate them, for them not to think that if they're a smaller company and everything is so obvious, that those risks won't appear? What do you advise? I understand, Zoya, that you have some experience in the international business, but I know that you've had a lot of training programs. So for such cases, what would you recommend? Thank you. I think that in fact, the essence of the approach won't change. I think that we are looking at the two main elements. The first is the value and leadership element, and the second one is the procedural and control element. When they are combined together, only when they are combined together, we will have the system working. Well, of course, it's obvious that in the organizations of small and medium size, they lack, maybe they don't have enough of financial investments for the implementation of some nice but expensive system to strengthen controls. But the first component, the first part, which is ethical, it does not need financial expenses. It is about leadership. So I wouldn't advise to go and to write codes of conducts, of ethical behavior, to sign that I am obliged to stick to those requirements. All of that can be done, in fact, in a soft way, through the values. I had an example in one of the companies the communication you have in a daily way in the working process, they conduct the business properly. It is one of the important values. They don't have the code with the director of the organization ending with, I don't know, the secretary of the reception and at any stage. So in fact, the excuse that we are a small organization and it does not concern us, no, it concerns everyone, especially if we look not only from the position of the proper business, but also profitability. Muddassir mentioned one of the examples about that, but even loyalty of the customer, consumer, any product. If you sell a dress or you sell a cookie or you create software. Why? Because if you look at the researchers, there are 2 points. First of all, the end users, our consumers, really pay a lot of attention not only to the material, but how it is done, how the product is done from the perspective of the ethical norms, the respect of human rights, natural resources, and so on. So we don't need scandals that there shouldn't be any scandals that everything should be done as transparent as possible. It should be corresponded to the ethical requirements. And secondly, when you're taken to the job and when your potential employees choose you as a company, because not only the employer chooses the employee, but the employee is choosing the company as well. So especially in the younger generation, I don't know, Y or Z generation, they also look at this ethical component of business conduction. And the second part is more about the toolkit, the tools of control, transparency, equal conditions for the customers, for the participants in the tender procedure, or any part of the procurement process. Again, it can be done even with the minimum budget. There are lots of startups and solutions which will provide that. And secondly, this is, well, maybe I will be a bit provocative here, but it seems to me that even if you have the technical solutions best in class, if the person doesn't have this ethical component, believe me, he will find the way to find a gap in the system. Because there are some artificial intelligences and so on. The person will find the clever way. If he wants, he will violate the rules. So I would pay attention to this first component more as the beginning and the most important component in spite of the size of the company. Thank you. Yes, you can find the gap anywhere. It's only about sophistication and the price, how to find the gap. Thank you so much. In any case, there are certain open standards and you can sign them and say, we comply to those standards, and that's it. You shouldn't invent a wheel. Muddassir, what pieces of advice would you give to our listeners who maybe lack this direction? They don't have proper papers and processes.
I think that there's two comments just to following up what Zoya just said. The first one is I think she's absolutely right that in the if you see the HR employee handbooks where there is like 2 pages of code of conduct, which actually when you get hired you never read anyway. Nobody does actually. I never read it, so I don't know about other people. But it's meaningless. Nobody knows that which page of the employee handbook is your code of conduct and what you have to do. It only happens when you are in really trouble, and then HR said, "Oh, you should read this is in the page second or page 23, whatever." But again, Zoya is absolutely right. It's driven by the values and the culture and the philosophy. It needs to be embedded into the vision, values, and the philosophy of the company. The people should say, no, we are ethical companies and this is how we do it. So that's the first part, which I agree. But the second part where Zoya said you can have the best possible IT system, and people are always gonna find a clever way of let's say doing something dodgy, which I think there is a ways and means to stop that, right? And if there is somebody who's clever enough to go around the, let's call it IT controls or SOX controls, then this person is in the wrong job. We should hire him into more clever opportunity to do business, right? But the way I would say is this is to come back to the small and medium size or the big enterprise. There is now a huge drive in terms of to deploy a better IT solutions, right? To improve the audit trail, to improve the documentation, to improve the verification of the suppliers, improve the whole, let's call it diagnostics, that how watertight your supply chain is and how good your supplies are. So there's information available and the tool available. One technology which I think, not I know, I think, I definitely believe will play a big role in the elimination of corruption is a blockchain, right? So once the blockchain, right now the concept people use is blockchain, but they do not understand blockchain, right? And it will take some time that people understand the blockchain. So blockchain, I'm not using as a buzzword, right? And I mean it when you just follow the theory that when there is a relationship where if I'm making a Apple phone or anything, regardless what I'm making, and if I'm selling it to the end customer, if I can track it, that who bought it and how original that phone or the Gucci bag is, then there's no point you buying basically a copycat from China or wherever, right? So the blockchain will definitely improves the whole let's call it how you assess suppliers, how you give them a business, how you do tender. It will improve that. The only thing lacking right now, there is not many companies who are actually available to make the technology available. So there is a couple of startups in Switzerland. They've got a huge funding of about 100 million euros each to do that. The government in UAE is very big on the blockchain as well, because most of their, let's call it, procurement processes are or tenders are done through the blockchain system. So they know that who is doing what, where is the where is the information coming from, who holds information. So I think technology will play a big role, especially in the public sector and in reducing the corruption element.
Абсолютно согласна, потому что
I totally agree with you, because automation is the first thing which helps to make the process transparent, the process where you produce the records, where you're recording everything which is taking place in different parts of our process. And blockchain, thank you, Muddassir, that you reminded our listeners about blockchain. It is the future which not a single action will be avoided. It will be documented in the system thanks to blockchain. This is just from the perspective of the wonderful tool to manage the whole process of supply chain, not just to follow unethical behavior or corruption, but just to follow the quality of the whole process. Thank you so much. I've got one more question. I cannot just skip it, because we're living in the complicated times, the new reality, and the conference has the name, the new reality as well. We are all living in it now, and we've got lots of things changed now. We are not together personally with you in Kiev in a wonderful atmosphere in the conference hall. We are now working online only, and lots of work came to online. In fact, all of us are working online, not in the offices. So would you please tell how the situation changed? Did it change at all from the perspective of ethical behavior in the procurement? Did it become better? Did it improve? What can you tell? Maybe you've got any data or statistical data from the world. What's the situation with that? Thank you for the question, Maryna. I may say that the following. And again, I think that any question should be considered broader from the perspective of all of the factors, not only the control or the compliance of the procedures, policies when we are working remotely, but how the whole remote work process impacted the teams, first of all, and the interaction between them. And a very interesting point is here because just in 3 to 4 weeks after the implementation of lockdown in Ukraine, compliance community get together through their unique organization to communicate, to share. Yes, we really met the compliance officers of different companies, both public and commercial, just to share what's changed. Has anything changed and what we should do with that? And a very interesting point for me was that, in fact, thing which was really the main topic throughout all of the speeches of all of the speakers was that people had the need in the body or the person whom you can ask if you're in doubts how it should be done properly remotely. When you don't see a person, when you need to work with the whole documentation, all of the papers, there was such a need emerging. It was felt. And my colleagues from the compliance were really inspired because they felt that our time is now. So the human factor maybe will always be the main one. And I think that the opportunity and the knowledge where you can come to get help, trust towards compliance officer or your own manager who is also responsible to do something compliant to the rules, or the legal department, because compliance can be done in different departments in different functions. And it's so important to have this element of trust. If it has been created before the remote mode of work, it was finally outbursting, and my colleagues shared that we had two focuses to provide, together with the IT teams, the continuous work of the systems with the certain controls and so on, but secondly, to support the colleagues in the issue of procedural cases, whether I do it right or wrong, or how should I do it right to go on with the continuous and compliant way of business. That is why it was really pleasant for me to hear that compliance has become needed in this critical situation, and that we have the human factor hand in hand with the trust, with the business partnership, and the support through the systems. Well, but here is one more question then raised. In English, we have the word of governance, and this is about governance, what you're speaking about, the whole institution, because it cannot be interpreted into Russian properly. The governance is the system of all of the combining elements from the ethical component for all of the employees. There is a need now for the people through the pandemics, right? Yes, definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Muddassir. And what about you? How is it done in the UAE, in your international company of Bridgestone? What's the situation there with the corona crisis?
I think the as a broader scale, it has impacted. It has impacted business. It has impacted how we do business. It has impacted a lot of things. I mean, just to start with, nobody's driving. When nobody's driving, nobody is using tires, and nobody's using tires, and we don't have a much business. So, having all said that, I think, but what it has actually changed, I think your question was how COVID has either improve things from the compliance and ethics perspective, either good or bad. I think it's very difficult to tell. But there's some stats of last 6 months is already coming out because people are not traveling as much. So there's low carbon emissions and things like that. But I think the biggest change has happened, a positive change has happened. The COVID has, fortunately or unfortunately, enforces us towards more digitalization. I mean, this instance right now, and we, sitting in a different places and having a conference and very meaningful intellectual discussion is an evidence of that. We would have not think it through when we were in Kiev last year, drinking, drinking wine and, eating some nice Ukraine food, right? So we did not think like this. So one thing has improved is the how people are open for digitalization. So the idea is not basically seen as a resistance to change. People are open for it. So that is basically opening new avenues to drive efficiency, to do things differently. Because as you can see in any other management initiatives, any other IT change, what is the management research says? So generally, management research says is two things: leadership focus and change management. So here right now, what you can see, the leadership focus is there for digitalization, and the change acceptance is there. So the two biggest, let's call it showstoppers or the resistance, are reduced. So therefore, what I see right now, that the acceptance of using digital solutions has enhanced big time, right? And the second thing I would like to say is this, and I think Corona crisis has have a sublime feeling of more of a sympathy, right? And I think Zoya talked about the word of trust, and it is the right word to use, that people are trusting more on each other, right? And more on how we do, behave in business. I mean, let me give you example that if last year, if I asked one of my bosses, oh, I want to work from home 1 day a week, they will kick me out, I'll be sacked, right? Because there was obsession of everybody should come to work, and you only go for your holiday. So that obsession is gone right now. As I say to people, in my job in the last 15 years as a supply chain people, unless I work in a warehouse and I'm moving parts or picking parcels, most of the things I do as a buyer or a procurement officer or a supply chain manager or a director or whatever, I manage information. That's what I do. So I manage information to manage material flow, right? And management of all information of all kinds. And I can do this in management of information from anywhere, right? So I can be at my home, I can be in the hotel, I can be in the airport. It doesn't really matter, and I can be equally effective. So the whole culture has almost got, let's call it, are on the steroids right now, that people are willing to work from home, do things differently, and it has in fact enhances a level of trust. So enhances the level of trust. There's more empathy towards employees. There's more empathy towards our business partners, and that is basically having a positive shift. And there is a less animosity between the players as well. So now, it's, for example, I have a very big issue right now in terms of containers in from Japan and documentation. So if that would have happened before, I can tell you that there must be a lot of fights. But right now, everybody consider there's a pandemic situation, and we can only work together with a lot of sympathy and empathy and find the right solution. So these are two things which I think is changed.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. I really liked how you, Muddassir, closed this topic. From one perspective, people stopped working so close to us. Lots of them are staying at home, and the processes need to go on. So we develop more trust towards each other, and the trust towards us working in the same way as one unified team, connecting with the suppliers. All of that needs really a high level of development of the emotional intellect or empathy you just mentioned. I totally agree with you. And as for the suppliers, we have become maybe not even more loyal, but more, I don't know, professional, more empathetical, including thanks to Corona crisis. I've mentioned for multiple times anywhere that one of the first points which the buyers and the supply chain should have done, and I hope they did it in March, that is to turn their face towards the suppliers. and to be honest, open, and to discuss all of the questions openly to become real partners, because there is no other way out of that crisis. Being counterweight to each other, it would be just impossible. I think you agree with me, right?
Yep.
So, and finally, I'd like to ask a question. Yesterday, I visited a webinar of one of the associations of the experts and graduates of CIPS in UAE. There was a very lively discussion there, and it is really coincides with our topic, the week of ethical behavior in the procurement. It was rather interesting. They've got lots of webinars. Unfortunately, I couldn't visit all of them, but I was surprised that they were just devoting separate time to the ethical behavior issues. And the figures which really impressed me, that they calculated that the losses, annual losses all over the world because of the unethical behavior and corruption in the procurement and supply chain were approximately 6.05% of GDP of the whole consolidated GDP in the world. In my opinion, this is the huge sum of money. If we take the countries where the corruption does not exist, those are the countries where the corruptions are rather high, this is an average indicator, I would say, but still, we would say that this indicator has to be decreased. So, in your opinion, what's the tendency will be in this situation? Will the situation improve? And plus, we have some impact on the pandemics, or considering the nature of the person, of the human being, we'll have the same indicators later. Muddassir, let you be the first to begin. I don't want to be the first one. I don't feel comfortable about that. Yes, and Zoya will finalize.
I'll say ladies first, right? So now I think it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen after the COVID. I think we don't even know what is after the COVID and when it is after the COVID, right? So let's hope this after the COVID situation is as soon as possible. But one thing is for sure, that as I think we already emphasized, the whole digitalization of the workspace between all parties, both internally and externally, is proven. So if, as I said, if one of my employees, my team members, I mean, she's working from home because she's pregnant for the last 6 months, right? She doesn't want to come, and baby is coming anytime soon. If she said to me next year, you know what, I want to work 2 days from home, and assume there is no COVID situation, and as long as she does the job, how can I say no to her? I cannot, right? Similarly, I used to travel a lot to see suppliers, right? That was one of my reasons of, I've seen 38 different countries, is to go and visit suppliers and stuff. But why we need to do it right now? I mean, at the moment we're doing everything. I'm working with the suppliers in Japan. I'm supplying suppliers with Turkey, South Africa, and I'm not allowed to travel, but I'm equally effective. We are equally doing everything we need to make sure we give the right product to the customer at the right time, with the right quality, the right price. So I think there's certain industries and certain norms of doing business will be seriously affected. Of course, it does not undermines the face-to-face interaction. It does not undermines the human touch. It does not undermine any of that, right? But I'm sure there will be, always have been the question asked, that if you could do it, 6 to 8 months of COVID, then why you really need to go and, see the supplier right now? So I can see those things coming. And similarly, how we do business as well. I mean, right now, if we can have a very meaningful discussion through this conference, which I find it equally effective, why there is a need for 200 people to get together, right? So, but there is a benefit, there's a pros and cons, but I can see these as I said, digitalization of work processes definitely will be used going forward.
Thank you, Zoya.
Спасибо, Муддассир, очень интересные наблюдения. Со своей стороны, я бы хотела добавить следующее. я всегда все-таки верю, такой неисправимый оптимист, что все изменения все-таки к лучшему. И каждое изменение, в английском языке у нас есть слово change, изменение, и если поменять одну буквочку, появляется chance, шанс или возможность. И в дополнении тех слов, которые говорил Муддассир, про возможность совершать и достигать результатов в режиме онлайн, в позитивном моменте, который случился с принятием диджитализации нашими коллегами, я хотела бы добавить еще два элемента. Первый элемент, что на самом деле ковид стал катализатором, таким сумасшедшим инноваций в закупках и не только в закупках. Мы видим примеры, когда для того, чтобы не остановить бизнес, люди внедряют проекты, которые планировали на 2 года, за 2 недели. И таких случаев полно. То есть уже позитивное изменение. Второе позитивное изменение, что, как ни странно, я это наблюдаю и на собственном личном опыте, и вот буквально на прошлой неделе разговаривали с коллегами с одной из компаний, что взаимоотношения, связи между коллегами укрепились, и люди даже стали знать друг о друге больше, не только в рабочем плане, но и в каких-то личностных связях больше, чем знали до того, как перешли все онлайн. Поэтому я все-таки верю в позитивные изменения. И, наверное, еще последняя такая вещь, уже чтобы закончить все-таки комплаенс и противодействием коррупции, это то, что также мы наблюдаем, что ковид стал катализатором изменений с точки зрения эффективности и упрощения политик и процедур при том, что мы соблюдаем все-таки баланс контролей и, скажем так, нагрузки, которые мы даем нашим коллегам, но очень много вещей упростились без какого-то риска действительно для бизнеса. То есть там примеры, когда рассказывали, что вот раньше надо было там 3 подписи по-любому, а теперь ушли в онлайн, и просто чтобы двигать бизнес, сократили там до 2 утверждений, или только утверждать там бидвейверы 2 участниками, а там бидрекорды 1 утвердителем. То есть еще мы получили позитивный такой момент, знаете, как природа очистилась, да, мы все видели каналы Венеции чистые и так далее. Даже, мне кажется, немножко и наши, может быть, иногда слишком строгие политики и процедуры, они тоже и с помощью диджитализации, и даже с точки зрения вот пересмотра процесса релевантного, они тоже упростились, при этом не увеличивая риск для организации с точки зрения комплайенс. Поэтому все будет хорошо, ребят, 100%.
Однозначно все будет хорошо, и, в общем-то, для одних это проблема, да, или как видят некоторые это проблему, мы видим это как шанс, и я много раз говорила, что кризисы — это шанс для закупок, тогда очень, закупок и цепочки поставок, тогда вспоминают о том, что, наверное, нам стоит уделить внимание и этой части там бизнеса, этим функциям, и здесь вот те, кто смогли воспользоваться этим, те, конечно же, молодцы. И подводя итоги этой дискуссии, хочу зафиксировать, что мы с вами достаточно много тем, кстати, обсудили, коснулись только про коррупцию, да, говорили про этическое поведение, что в первую очередь это создание институций такой внутренней, да, компанию, какая бы она ни была. Другой момент необходимо лидерство и демонстрация этого поведения с минимальной, скажем так, толерантности к коррупции, это обязательно. Третьим элементом это автоматизация, и те, кто не успел или не сделал это, очень сильно пострадал именно во время кризиса. Вот. Ну и исходя из того, что вы сказали, в общем-то, вопрос доверия, а это вопрос лидерства в том числе, если ты доверяешь лидеру, если ты доверяешь лидерской позиции, то и вопрос доверия и эмпатичного такого поведения, он присутствует, да, как в поведении человека, так и в поведении компании. То есть с вашей точки зрения оно будет еще больше развиваться, и мы будем жить в новой реальности уже с немного другими компетенциями, которые необходимы нам в закупках и цепочке поставок. Если я правильно подвела итоги, вы согласны со мной? Вот, можем эту сессию заканчивать. Если у вас есть еще что сказать, еще по 1 минутке могу дать.
Марина, я просто хотела поблагодарить, во-первых, Муддассир, кудос за вашу экспертизу, было супер круто быть вместе на сессии, опять-таки никакие нам запреты на перелет не есть препятствием. Марина, спасибо за прекрасную модерацию, и надеемся на будущие встречи и онлайн, и офлайн. Спасибо.
Да, я тоже надеюсь и верю в это. Не то, что надеюсь, я верю в это, что скоро они будут.
No, what I will add is, again, thank you very much. It's been, I think, a pleasure to be part of this channel. Absolutely like the discussion with Zoya and you. Fantastic discussion. We would probably want to have on a stage with more lights, camera, and action. I'm sure Victoria would like that, but that's what we're missing, right? But that's we're missing Victoria's glamour, and that's the part. This is the only thing missing out of this conversation, right? And so we need Victoria and we need glamour. So we need to get together next year, and we need to do that. So fantastic discussion. The last comment, as someone said to me the other day, that don't miss the opportunity bring by the big crisis, right? So there, as you guys said, there's a huge opportunity coming. It is only accelerating the good stuff and the procurement and supply chain. So I'm particularly very excited. And there was some stats shared by someone that in 2008, companies like Snapchat, Instagram, Uber, those big companies was bought during the financial crisis, right, of 2008. And I'm 120% sure that this crisis of the last 6 months, as Zoya said, driving a lot more efficiency and innovation will result in some big companies and big brands. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's absolutely pleasure to be with you guys, and so looking forward for further discussion. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо, ваш вклад.
Thank you so much. Your investment is so important into this topic. Thank you so much. Thank you. See you soon, live and online.